During the re-sentencing hearing following a remand from the Michigan Court of Appeals, Marty Mitchell returned to court as the judge reconsidered the scoring of the advisory sentencing guidelines. After reviewing the evidence, the court increased the guideline score based on findings that Mitchell used force against officers during his arrest, rejecting his claims that he did not kick anyone and that his actions were influenced by blindness from glaucoma. The prosecution highlighted Mitchell's lengthy 30-year criminal record, which included numerous drunk driving convictions and offenses committed while he was on probation or bond. In imposing sentence, the judge stressed Mitchell's repeated failures under supervision, his ongoing substance abuse problems, and his unwillingness to accept responsibility for his behavior. The court ultimately sentenced Mitchell to 3 to 5 years in the Department of Corrections, awarding credit for time served and ordering additional fines.
Here for a resentencing on remand from the Michigan Court of Appeals in the case of People versus Marty Mitchell. It's filed 22-6430. Counsel, you want to state your appearances for the record, beginning with People?
Melissa Goodrich, Blaine County Prosecutor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Melissa Krauskopf on behalf of Mr. Mitchell. He's present here, seated to my right.
The advisory guidelines have been scored at 12 to 24 months. Ms. Krauskopf, any scoring challenges from the defense?
No, Your Honor. I believe 12 to 24 months is accurate.
So People did file an objection to OV-19 being scored at 10 points, arguing that it should be at 15 points. Ms. Goodrich, are you continuing that objection today?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, due to the amount of force that the defendant used that day, he had driven off beyond the officer's commands, and then so they had to pull him over again, and then he refused to get out of the vehicle, rolled down the windows. They had to break through a window and then pull him away from the steering wheel. He began kicking the officers with his legs. Therefore, we believe that OV-19 is properly scored at 15 rather than 10 points.
That variable, OV-19, was scored at 10 points on the original sentence in this case. When asked if there were any additions, deletions, or corrections to the guidelines of the original sentencing, the People said no, so there was no objection made at the original sentence. Following the appeal in this case, the People did file a confession of error. The COA rejected it because we didn't quite agree on the remedy, although we agreed that there was an error. I appreciate that a resentencing opens things back up, but I will, I guess, just put on the record that I don't love the idea of that variable being scored now when the People had an opportunity to correct it previously. It feels a little punitive.
A remand for resentencing does reopen all issues for resentencing, and I've seen sometimes where then the defense has objections that they didn't have previously. As long as, I guess, if it had been presented and argued in the Court of Appeals and there was an adjudication on the issue, it of course would be law of the case, and we wouldn't be able to reopen it even if they're, like, if they hold that something was improperly scored and they send it back for resentencing, we can't just, that scoring is locked in by the Court of Appeals decision. Here, the Court of Appeals remand was that I failed to, and upon review of the sentencing transcript, they're absolutely right. I failed to articulate any reasons at all for the extent of the departure. So a remand was certainly appropriate. And here the evidence does show that Mr. Mitchell did use force and the threat of force in his interference with the officer's obligations that day, including actually forcibly kicking them. So based upon that, I would score OV-19 at 15 points, from 12 to 24 to 14 to 29. Any objection to my arithmetic or range calculations from the defense on that?
No, Your Honor. I'll just, for Mr. Mitchell's benefit, I'll just note my objection to the court scoring OV-19, but I think the court has done the math correctly based on the way the court's going to score it.
Okay, thank you. That issue is preserved. Ms. Krauskopf, anything you want to say on behalf of your client?
Your Honor, the court can take post-conviction behavior into account that is People versus Fields. And so I will note that at least from the update that we have here, he's been doing well in prison. You know, one minor misconduct for out of place is really certainly very far from the worst thing that I have seen. The report reflects that he's quiet, he's not causing anybody any problems, he's completed a program. He also informs me that he's being
Marty Mitchell stood in the holding area behind the courtroom, wrists loosely cuffed, staring at the scuffed gray floor beneath his boots. He had stood on this same linoleum more times than he cared to count over the last 30 years, yet today felt different. This wasn't a first appearance. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a sentencing in the traditional sense. This was a return. A remand. The Michigan Court of Appeals had sent his case back down, a thin sliver of hope wrapped in dense legal language. When his attorney had explained it over the phone, Marty had clung to a single phrase like a life raft: resentencing hearing. In Marty's mind, resentencing meant reconsideration. Reconsideration meant possibility. He flexed his fingers, feeling the stiffness in his knuckles, the dull ache that never truly left his hands anymore. His eyesight blurred slightly as he blinked, another reminder of the glaucoma diagnosis he had leaned on more heavily in recent years. Some days he believed it excused him. Other days he feared it was just another excuse he told himself. The deputy opened the door. "Mitchell," he said. "Court's ready." Chapter 2. The bench. The courtroom was quiet when Marty was led in, the kind of quiet that pressed down on a person's chest. The judge sat high above, robe perfectly pressed, expression unreadable. He was not the original sentencing judge, but his presence carried the same authority, the same finality. Marty's attorney, Daniel Harper, rose as his client was seated beside him. "Good morning, Your Honor," Harper said. The judge nodded once. "Good morning." The prosecutor, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper memory, adjusted her stack of files. She had prosecuted Marty before. More than once. This matter, the judge began, is before the court on remand from the Michigan Court of Appeals for resentencing. Specifically, the appellate court has directed this court to revisit the scoring of the advisory sentencing guidelines. Marty's heart beat faster. Guidelines. Numbers. Points. They had followed him his entire adult life. Chapter 3. The Guidelines Debate. "Counsel," the judge said, "we'll begin with the scoring issue." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the people maintain that the original scoring understated the defendant's conduct during his arrest. Specifically, the use of force against law enforcement officers." Marty stiffened. Harper stood quickly. "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell has consistently denied kicking or intentionally striking any officer. He maintains that his physical movements were involuntary and exacerbated by impaired vision due to glaucoma." The judge looked down at Marty. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "you're claiming you did not kick the officers." "Yes, sir," Marty said, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't see right. Everything was blurry. I panicked." The prosecutor didn't react immediately. When she did, her voice was measured. The officers testified that Mr. Mitchell resisted arrest, flailed his legs, and made contact with at least one officer. Whether he calls it panic or force, the result was the same. The judge leaned back slightly. "The appellate court has left this determination to this court," he said. "I find that the defendant's conduct does constitute the use of force under the guidelines." Harper exhaled slowly. Marty felt something sink inside his chest. Chapter 4. 30 years. The prosecutor approached the podium again, this time with confidence. "Your Honor, when considering the appropriate sentence, it's impossible to ignore Mr. Mitchell's criminal history." She opened a thick file. "For over 30 years, Mr. Mitchell has cycled through the criminal justice system. Multiple convictions for operating while intoxicated. Repeated probation violations. Crimes committed while on bond. Crimes committed while already under court supervision." She paused, letting the words hang. "This is not a man who stumbled once and fell. This is a pattern." Marty stared straight ahead. He remembered the first DUI. He had been 22, laughing it off with friends. He remembered the second, the third. The promises to stop. The court-ordered programs he half-heartedly attended. He remembered standing before judges who warned him, gave him chances, extended leniency. He remembered burning every one of those chances. Chapter 5. The Defense. Harper stood again. "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell is not denying his past. But resentencing is about proportionality. It's about fairness. He is older now. His health is declining. He struggles with vision impairment. Incarceration will not address the underlying issues that led him here: substance abuse and untreated addiction." The judge listened silently. Harper continued, "A lengthy prison sentence may punish, but it will not rehabilitate. Marty nodded subtly, clinging to every word. Chapter 6. Accountability. The judge folded his hands. Mr. Mitchell, he said, I've reviewed your file carefully. Marty looked up. What stands out, the judge continued, is not just the number of convictions, but your consistent failure to comply with supervision. Probation. Bond. Parole. Each time, you were given conditions. Each time, you violated them. Marty swallowed. You blame alcohol. You blame vision problems. You blame circumstances. But I do not see acceptance of responsibility. Marty opened his mouth, then closed it. Substance abuse, the judge said, may explain behavior, but it does not excuse it. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Chapter 7. The sentence. The courtroom was completely silent. After reconsidering the advisory guidelines, the judge said, and in light of the defendant's conduct during arrest, extensive criminal history, and repeated failures under supervision, this court finds that an upward scoring is appropriate. Marty's heart pounded. It is the sentence of this court, the judge continued, that you serve a term of 3 to 5 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. Harper closed his eyes briefly. Marty felt the room tilt. You will receive credit for time already served, the judge added. The court also imposes statutory fines and costs. The gavel came down. That is the order of the court. Chapter 8. Aftermath. The deputies stepped forward. Marty stood slowly, legs heavy, mind numb. As he was led away, he glanced back once, at his attorney, at the judge, at the empty benches. 30 years had led him here. Not with anger. Not with outrage. But with a quiet, unavoidable finality. Epilogue. Back in chambers, the judge removed his robe and sat quietly for a moment. Sentencing was never easy, especially when the defendant's story was long, complicated, and familiar. In the end, the law demanded consistency and accountability. Outside, Marty Mitchell disappeared down the hallway, the sound of his chains echoing softly. Another chapter closed, another sentence written not just by the court, but by decades of choices that could no longer be undone.